The town of Dust Creek was a place where the wind never rested, where dust clung to everything, faces, hearts, and even dreams. On the day the story begins, the town's main street was crowded for something ugly disguised as entertainment, a human auction. Under the scorching sun, Jed Collins, a ruthless trader known for buying and selling more than cattle, stood on a wooden platform. Before him were several captives, men, women, and children, taken during border raids. Most were frightened settlers, but one woman stood apart. Her wrists were bound, her chin high, her dark hair braided with eagle feathers. She was neither trembling nor begging like the others. Her name was Mariah. The crowd whispered about her. Some said she was the daughter of an Apache war chief who once terrorized the frontier. Others claimed she was cursed. Every man who tried to possess her had met a violent end. Whether truth or rumor, it only made her seem more dangerous, more valuable. Jed Collins grinned as he announced her. Half Apache, half Mexican. Tough. As rawhide and just as wild. Who'll start the bidding? Laughter rippled through the dusty air. A few men shouted prices, some for sport, others for darker intentions. In the back of the crowd, a tall figure stood still, Luke Callahan, a rancher from the edge of the territory. He'd come to town only to sell a few head of cattle and buy supplies. But now, he couldn't look away. He watched as Mariah's eyes met his, steady, defiant, and full of fire. Something in that look stirred him deeply. Not pity, not desire. Something else, a sense of wrong. Jed noticed his hesitation and sneered. Well now, even Luke Callahan's looking. Don't tell me the Saint of Dry Rivers got himself a taste for Apache women? The crowd erupted in mocking laughter. Luke's jaw tightened. He wasn't one to seek fights, but he couldn't stomach the cruelty in Jed's grin or the hungry way the men stared at Mariah. On impulse, he stepped forward. What's the price? He asked. Jed raised an eyebrow, testing him. For her? More than you can pay, rancher. Luke reached into his pocket, pulled out a gold coin, the payment he'd just earned from selling cattle, and tossed it onto the platform. The coin hit the wood with a sharp ring. The laughter died. That enough to buy her freedom? Luke said quietly. Jed's smirk faltered for the first time. After a moment, he shrugged and called out, Sold! To the gentleman with more conscience than sense. The gavel slammed down, and with that single act, Luke Callahan had done something that would change both their lives forever. The crowd dispersed, some laughing, others muttering. Mariah stood still, her expression unreadable. When Jed handed her the rope that bound her wrists, Luke cut it immediately. You're free now, he said simply. She didn't thank him, didn't smile. Instead, she stared at him for a long time, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. Free? Out here, no woman is free. Luke said nothing. He offered her a ride back to his ranch until he could find her safe passage elsewhere. She didn't answer but climbed onto the wagon, keeping her distance, her eyes on the horizon. As the sun sank behind the mesas, the wind carried the faint scent of rain. Luke guided the horses home, feeling the weight of what he'd done settle heavy on his shoulders. He hadn't saved her. He'd just bought himself a storm, one that would test his honor, his heart, and everything he believed about right and wrong. And beside him, Mariah sat silently, her gaze cold and steady, as if she already knew how the storm would end. The wind howled across the open prairie as the first thunderclouds rolled in. By the time Luke Callahan and Mariah reached the ranch, rain had begun to fall in heavy slanted sheets. The old wooden house stood sturdy against the storm, its porch creaking as the wind whipped through the grass. Luke led the horses into the barn while Mariah stood by the wagon, soaked to the bone, but refusing to move until he told her to. When he finally returned, she was still there, her posture rigid, her eyes unreadable. Come inside before you catch cold, he said simply. She hesitated, then followed. Inside, the ranch house smelled of pine wood and smoke. Luke stoked the fire, setting a pot of beans on the stove. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a chair. Mariah obeyed, though the word obedience didn't fit her. She moved like someone who had learned long ago to do only what survival required. The firelight flickered across her face, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, a faint scar near her temple. She looked both fragile and unbreakable at once. Luke poured her a tin cup of coffee and slid it across the table. She didn't drink it. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. "Do what?" "Buy me." Luke sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. "Wasn't right what they were doing. I just wanted to stop it." She studied him for a long moment, her gaze sharp, searching for deceit. Then she said the words that froze him in place. "You paid for me. Now do it." For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of fire and the steady drum of rain on the roof. Luke looked at her, confused. "Do what?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Whatever men do when they buy a woman." The words hit him like a fist. He realized she truly believed that was what he wanted, that every man who had ever touched her life had taken something from her. Her tone wasn't seductive. It was resigned, almost defiant, as if she wanted to end the humiliation on her own terms. Luke's jaw tightened. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "That's not what I want." She frowned, not understanding. "You think I'm dirty? Untouchable?" "I think you're a person," he said firmly. "You don't owe me a damn thing." For the first time, her eyes flickered with confusion. The idea that someone might save her without expecting payment in flesh or obedience seemed foreign. She turned away, her shoulders trembling, not from cold, but from anger. "Don't pretend to be kind," she muttered. "Kindness always costs more later." Luke didn't argue. He just handed her a blanket and pointed toward the spare room. "You can sleep in there, door locks from the inside." Then he walked out to the porch, leaving her alone by the fire. Outside, lightning split the sky in jagged white lines. Luke leaned against a post, the rain soaking his shirt. He wasn't sure if he'd done the right thing. Out here, appearances mattered. The town would already be whispering that he'd bought a woman, brought her home, and God knew what else. But his conscience told him he couldn't turn her back into the storm, not after what she'd endured. Inside the house, Mariah sat on the edge of the bed, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She listened to the thunder and thought about the man outside. Every instinct told her not to trust him, yet something about his silence, his refusal to touch her, made her uneasy in a different way. Men she understood. Mercy she did not. When Luke came back in later, she pretended to be asleep. He stopped, by the doorway, looking at her once, then quietly closed the door. That night, neither of them rested. He lay awake, wondering why her eyes haunted him. She lay awake, wondering if, for the first time in her life, she had met a man who wanted nothing from her at all. Morning came slow and golden over the plains. The rain had washed the dust from the land, leaving everything bright and sharp. The kind of morning that almost fooled a man into believing the world was good. But for Luke Callahan and Mariah, the quiet after the storm carried a tension neither could name. Luke found her already awake, standing by the corral as the horses grazed. She moved with quiet grace, her hair loose now, her bare feet light on the damp earth. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You handle horses like you were born in the saddle?" Mariah didn't look at him. "My father taught me," she said, "before the soldiers came." Luke wanted to ask more, but saw the way her eyes darkened at the memory. He nodded and handed her a biscuit. "You can stay here a few days, until I figure out where you'll go next." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Where I'll go? There's nowhere I can go. The towns hate my blood, and my people would call me tainted." The truth of her words settled between them like a shadow. Luke said nothing, only tipped his hat and went to work mending the fence. Over the next few days, Mariah began helping around the ranch. She fed the chickens, carried water, even repaired the old barn door without being asked. She didn't smile, but she no longer kept her distance. Luke, for his part, stopped trying to talk too much. He let the silence work for them both. Yet beneath that fragile peace, danger was already stirring. At the Dust Creek Saloon, Jed Collins was drinking hard, his face twisted with rage. Losing Mariah at the auction had humiliated him in front of the entire town. Now he spread a different kind of rumor, that Luke Callahan had taken an Apache woman into his house and was living in sin with her. The words carried like wildfire through the prairie towns, twisting and growing until even Luke's hired hands began whispering behind his back. When one of them, a brash young cowboy named Tate, made a crude joke within Mariah's hearing, Luke fired him on the spot. "Don't come back," Luke growled, hand on his gun belt. "You want to laugh at someone, try me." The man left cursing, but the message was clear. Luke would protect her, no matter the cost. That night, Mariah approached him by the firelight. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "They'll come for you next." "I've dealt with worse," Luke replied. "And I don't stand by while someone gets spat on for what they are." Her eyes softened for a moment, though her voice remained guarded. "You talk like a man who hasn't seen the world burn." He smiled faintly. "I've seen enough to know when it needs saving." Mariah turned away, but something in her chest shifted, something she didn't want to feel. Later, as the wind swept across the plains, she took out a small leather pouch from beneath her dress. Inside was a folded piece of hide, covered with faint markings, a map. The lines traced the canyons north of Dust Creek, leading to a place she had never shown anyone. It was her secret, her curse, and her inheritance. Her father had died to protect it, and now, even in this quiet ranch house, she could feel danger closing in. She tucked the map away as a distant howl echoed through the night. Coyotes, or maybe something worse. Outside, Luke sat on the porch cleaning his rifle. He looked out over the moonlit plains, uneasy. He didn't know why, but he felt the air shift, heavy with something unseen. Inside, Mariah stared at the dying fire, clutching her father's map close to her heart. She had come to Dust Creek to escape her past. But now, with the rancher who had bought her freedom, that past was riding fast across the plains, and it was bringing death with it. The following week brought a strange calm to the Callahan ranch. The days stretched quiet beneath the wide western sky, but both Luke and Mariah felt it, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. The horses were restless, the dogs barked at nothing, and every sunset seemed to bleed redder across the horizon. Luke had tried to convince himself the trouble would pass. Jed Collins was a coward at heart. Maybe his anger would fade, but deep down, Luke knew men like Jed didn't forget humiliation, and men who trafficked in hate and greed didn't forgive a rancher who made them look weak. Mariah sensed it too. She'd seen the way predators circled before they struck. Each night, she sharpened the old hunting knife Luke had given her, though she never said why. When he asked, she simply said, "A woman alone learns to be ready." On the fourth night, the wind changed, hot and dry, carrying the scent of smoke and whiskey. Luke was sitting by the fire when his hound began growling low. A heartbeat later came the sound of hoofbeats, many of them. He stood, grabbed his rifle, and blew out the lamp. "Mariah," he whispered, "get down." From the window, he saw them. Jed Collins and 6 armed riders, their faces half hidden under wide hats. The moonlight glinted off their gun barrels. They were drunk, loud, and angry at shouting Luke's name. "Callahan!" Jed bellowed from the yard. "You got something that belongs to me. Hand her over and maybe I'll let you live." Luke stepped out onto the porch, rifle in hand. "She's not yours, Jed. She's not anyone's." Jed spat into the dirt. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a fool who doesn't know what she is. That half-breed's cursed. Every man who takes her side ends up in the ground." Luke's voice was steady. "Then I guess you'll be digging your own grave tonight." The men laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that masks fear. Then Jed fired first. The shot cracked through the night, splintering the porch post beside Luke's head. The ranch exploded into chaos. Luke fired back, taking down one rider. Mariah, who had crawled out the back, appeared suddenly by the corral, bow in hand, moving like a ghost. She loosed an arrow that struck a man clean through the throat. Another went down screaming. The fight raged fierce and fast. Bullets shattered windows. Flames caught on the barn roof. Luke moved with grim precision, his rifle smoking, each shot driven by instinct. Mariah fought beside him, silent and deadly, her hair whipping in the wind. Then Jed caught her by the arm, dragging her toward him. "I told you you're mine, girl!" he snarled, pistol raised. Before he could pull the trigger, Luke appeared behind him. The crack of his rifle echoed across the prairie, and Jed Collins dropped like a stone. Silence fell. Smoke drifted through the air. 2 horses bolted into the dark, and the remaining outlaws fled, leaving their dead behind. Luke staggered to the porch, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder. Mariah ran to him, catching him as he fell. "Don't you dare die!" she whispered fiercely, pressing her hands to the wound. "You're too stubborn for that." He smiled faintly, his breath shallow. "You fight better than most men I've met." Mariah's eyes filled with tears she hadn't known she could shed. "That's because I've had to." All through the night she tended to him, boiling water, stitching the wound, whispering words in Apache to keep his spirit strong. When dawn came, the barn still smoldered, and the land smelled of smoke and blood. Luke opened his eyes weakly, and the first thing he saw was her face, streaked with ash and sunrise. "You saved me," he murmured. Mariah touched his cheek gently. "No, you saved me first." For the first time since Dust Creek, she smiled, faint, weary, but real. The blood had been spilled, the debt repaid, but neither of them yet knew that the fight had only just begun. The morning after the gunfight dawned gray and hollow. Smoke still curled from the blackened barn, and the air carried the heavy scent of gunpowder and death. Luke Callahan sat on the porch, pale and weak from his wound, while Mariah worked silently, burying the dead men in a line behind the corral. The prairie wind blew hard, scattering dust across the fresh mounds of earth. When she was done, she wiped her hands on her torn dress and looked toward the horizon. Her face was calm, but her eyes told another story, one of fear. "Jed Collins was not the worst of them," she said quietly. "Others will come. They'll want what he wanted." Luke frowned. "What was it he wanted, Mariah? You or something else?" For a moment she didn't answer. Then she sat beside him, her hands trembling slightly. "It was never me he wanted," she said. "It was what I carry." From the pocket of her dress she pulled out a small, weathered piece of hide, folded and bound with rawhide string. She hesitated, then opened it. On the inside was a map, drawn in faint, careful lines marked with symbols that seemed older than the frontier itself. Luke leaned closer. "What is this?" "My father's legacy," she said. "He was an Apache war leader once. Before the soldiers took our land, he found a place in the mountains, rich with silver. He hid the mine from both white men and our own people. Said it was cursed. Said it would bring nothing but death." Her voice trembled as she continued. "When he died, he made me swear to protect it." But word spread. Men like Jed Collins heard tales. They thought if they caught me, they'd find their fortune. She looked down at the map, her eyes burning. "They'll never stop, Luke, not until they find what they're looking for." Luke sat in silence for a long time, the wind whistling through the fence posts. Finally, he spoke. "If what you say is true, you can't stay here. We'll take this to the Silver Mesa Hills, see it destroyed, hidden, whatever it takes." Mariah blinked in surprise. "You'd do that? You'd help me?" He met her eyes. "I've seen what greed does to men. Gold, silver, out it turns hearts to stone. If this map can bring that kind of ruin, I'd rather burn it myself." They set out at dawn 2 days later. Luke still weak but determined. The journey to Silver Mesa was long, through canyons, across dry riverbeds, and into land that few dared to enter. Each night they camped under the stars, sharing bits of their pasts. Mariah told him about her father, about her life between two worlds, never fully Apache, never fully Mexican, never accepted anywhere. Luke told her about the war he'd fought in as a young man, about the things he'd done that still haunted him. By the third night, they had grown quiet together. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. Something fragile and real was growing between them, something neither of them dared to name. When they reached the Silver Mesa Hills, Mariah led him to a narrow canyon. There, hidden behind a waterfall, was the entrance to a mine, old, dark, and glimmering faintly with veins of silver in the rock. Luke stared at it, feeling a chill crawl up his spine. "Your father was right," he said softly. "This isn't treasure. It's poison," Mariah nodded. "Then let it die here." Without another word, Luke gathered dry brush and oil from their packs. Together they set the mine ablaze. Flames roared up the shaft, smoke curling into the bright desert sky. The map they burned last, the hide curling black in Mariah's trembling hands. When it was done, they stood in silence, watching the fire consume the past. Then Luke reached for her hand. "It's over," he said. She looked at him, her voice breaking. "No, Rancher, it's just beginning." And in that moment, as the flames died and the hills echoed with silence, Luke realized she wasn't talking about the silver anymore. She was talking about them, about a bond forged not by gold but by sacrifice, fire, and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, love could grow even from ashes. Months passed after the fire in the Silver Mesa Hills. The land began to heal. Blackened brush turned green again, and the sound of running water replaced the echo of gunfire. At the Callahan Ranch, the fields were alive once more, the fences rebuilt, and the smell of hay and horses returned to the air. But it wasn't just the land that had changed. Luke Callahan was no longer the solitary man he had been. The lines of grief and loneliness that once marked his face had softened, and the woman who now rode beside him each morning, Mariah, had transformed too. She no longer moved like a fugitive or a captive. She carried herself with quiet pride, her eyes calm and strong, as though the wind itself had finally stopped chasing her. The people of Dust Creek talked, of course. They always did. Some still whispered that Luke had taken in a half-Apache woman. Others said she'd bewitched him, that he'd lost his mind for bringing her into his home. But when Luke rode into town with Mariah at his side, her head held high and her hands steady on the reins, the whispers died on the wind. No one dared speak their judgments aloud. Not after the night Jed Collins's gang was found buried on the prairie. Still, Luke knew the gossip hurt her, even if she never said so. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the plains in fire, he said softly, "If you want to leave this place, start fresh somewhere no one knows us. I'll take you there." Mariah turned to him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she smiled, that rare, gentle smile that had become his favorite sight. "This land is where you found me," she said. "It's where we fought and bled. If I'm ever to belong anywhere, it's here." Luke looked away, his throat tight. "Then I reckon you belong with me," he murmured. The days slipped into weeks, and with each sunrise the bond between them grew, not a sudden fire, but a steady warmth that filled every corner of their lives. Mariah tended the horses and planted herbs behind the house. Luke taught her to read and write English. She taught him a few words in Apache. They laughed more easily now, shared more silences that didn't need to be broken. Then, one autumn morning, a traveling preacher stopped at the ranch. He was an old man with kind eyes and a horse that looked nearly as tired as he was. He'd come seeking water and rest, but when he saw the way Luke and Mariah looked at each other, he smiled knowingly. Over supper, he asked, "You two married?" Luke choked slightly on his coffee. "Not exactly," he said. "Didn't seem proper to—" Mariah cut him off with a teasing grin. "He paid for me once," she said lightly, "but he never made it official before God." The old preacher laughed. "Well, son, seems to me you've got the chance to set that right." Luke looked at her, a flicker of surprise, then of something deeper in his eyes. "You'd have me truly?" Mariah reached across the table and took his rough hand in hers. "You bought my freedom, not my heart," she said softly. "That I gave you for nothing." The next evening, as the sun dipped low over the prairie, they stood together under the open sky. The preacher said a few simple words, and Luke placed a plain silver ring on her finger. Not a jewel, just a band forged from his father's old spur. Mariah's eyes glistened as she whispered her vow in both English and Apache. When it was done, Luke kissed her, not as a savior or a master, but as a man kissing the only woman who had ever made him whole. The preacher left the next morning, tipping his hat. "You've got a good woman there, Callahan," he said. Luke smiled. "No," he answered quietly. "I've got a wife." As the dawn broke over the wide plains, Mariah stood beside him, her hand in his. The ranch stretched before them, endless and wild, a symbol of all they had endured. Once she had been sold, chained, and hunted. Now she was free, loved, and home. And as the wind whispered across the prairie, Luke Callahan realized something he'd never believed possible. That sometimes, in the Wild West, redemption didn't come from gold, or gunfire, or vengeance. It came from love.